Welcome back to module number 2 for week number 2. We are here talking about quotations. We just talked about making connections. Now we're talking about quotations. And when it comes to using quotes in a paper, at this level, at the W130 level, there is one acronym that you need to completely understand. And that is the 3 I's. And those I's are introduce, integrate, and interpret. Now, I'm going to go into that a little bit. The readings for this week not only outline what the 3 I's are, but they give you some really great examples of the 3 I's and different ways to do it okay and do it really well. Okay, so what I want you all to do is make sure that you do the reading. There's great examples in there. And what I'm going to do here in this video is explain them just a little bit more, give you another example from a student paper. The student has given me permission to use their paper, and it was a paper. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand that using quotes is very important. I am not at this point going to get into MLA citation. I think that high school and junior high probably gave you a little bit of a basis for this. I will definitely be going into it in a subsequent week. And the one thing that I will definitely make sure to tell you at this point is if you use one of those MLA sourcing softwares, we as professors know that you do it. They are not foolproof. They're not great. They actually are not helpful. Okay. We will teach you how to use it in this class. So I don't want you to worry about that right now. But what I do want you to pay attention to is how to introduce, integrate, and interpret a quote into your actual body paragraphs, your connection paragraphs. So you have 2 quotes. You want to get a quote from text number 1, and you want to get a quote from text number 2. Maybe those 2 things conflict. Maybe those 2 things confirm one another. Maybe they complicate things. Remember the 3 C's? Maybe it's something that really helps you, and you're using 2 different quotes to illustrate or to define a key term or a key concept in relation to your own argument. So that's what we're looking at. You will never, in one paragraph, in one body paragraph, use a quote from text number 1 and connect it to a quote from text number 1. Never. You're always using quotes from 2 different texts in each of these body paragraphs. Author 1, author 2. Text number 1, text number 2. Never the same text. Okay, you want to make sure that you have everything concise and it's from text 1 and text 2. You want to introduce, integrate, and interpret each quote from different texts. Okay, and what I want to make sure that you understand is that when you introduce a text, if you've already had a good introduction paragraph, you don't need to say the name of the text that it comes from, but you will need to say the author. David Foster Wallace notes that blank. Here's your quote. Or Garnett Cottigan argues. Here's your quote. You want to introduce that stuff. But when it comes to introducing a quote, you want to also keep in mind that maybe your reader doesn't know the texts that you're talking about. So if you just bring up a quote out of nowhere with no introduction, with no kind of context or background, we as a reader can get lost. So the way that I like to explain this is your reader is somebody that's pretty smart, and maybe they read this text, but maybe they read it a long time ago. So you're going to need to kind of remind them about what it is that you're talking about. What is the context or everything around it? right? You don't want to quote in a vacuum. You don't want to just like drop words in. Your quote needs to match up with both the grammar of your sentences as well as whatever argument that you're setting up. It needs to all service your arguments. And you need to think that your reader might be smart enough to pick up on things, but maybe doesn't necessarily know. So with your introduction of the quote, you want to say who's saying it, what's the context in which it is found, and how is it useful, okay? The one I that most people have a problem with is the second I. That would be integration, all right? And that's one of those things that most people just kind of don't really get how to integrate that quote. Like what is it that I'm supposed to do? And what I really want to show you is how to integrate a quote into your actual paper. So what I'm going to do here is I hope that you can all see this here. That's an example, but what I really want everyone to see here is the three I's: introduce, integrate, and interpret. Integrate. Your quote starts where you started. And you want to make sure that the quote flows with your sentence to make sure that it's smooth and not clunky. You are in charge of your quote. That's why they give you quotation marks. You are the one who starts it. You don't have to start at the beginning of the sentence. You don't have to end at the end of the sentence. You can quote wherever you want to start it. What is the most important information that you have there? And you are in charge of it. You are the one who actually tells your reader when to start reading where the quote is. That's why they give you the quotation marks. So I just want to make sure that you see this. You integrate your quote. You introduce who is talking, give it a little bit of context, and then you integrate it. You start your quote wherever you want to, but you make that quote flow with your own sentence. You want to make sure that the grammar works, and I can show you some bracketing that would really help you with that. And so you basically quote what you need to quote. You don't have to start at the beginning. You don't have to start at the end. You start it where you need to, and you end it where you need to. And it flows with your own sentence. You want to make sure that it is smooth. You want to make sure that it is integrated smoothly, not clunky. And then after you do that, then you interpret it. Interpretation is not summary. You don't just repeat the words in your own words of what the quote is. You talk about what the quote is saying and how it pertains to the argument that you are saying. You don't just repeat it. You actually interpret it. Summary, my friends, is not analysis. And you want to use your quotes. You want to introduce them, fit them into your sentence structure, and use them to prove a point, not just to echo them. If you just regurgitate and repeat what is being said, then you are doing nothing more than just repeating what somebody else said. You're not making your own argument. That's a book report. And I'm not looking for a book report. I'm looking for an argument. Okay. And your reading actually has some pretty good examples of all of this. It has big examples in paragraphs, and it has smaller examples in those tables. So please read those. But what I also have here is a pretty good example of how to introduce and integrate everything. What we have here is starting from this paragraph, obtaining factual information, and you don't need to know exactly what the argument is. What I want you to pay attention to is how the quote is being used inside the paragraph, okay? Obtaining factual information can be quite difficult in this day and age. However, especially with the rise of the internet, that's not a great sentence, but that is a focal sentence. Remember the fit it method? That lets us as the reader know what this paragraph is going to be talking about. It's talking about the information age and getting good factual information. That's what this paragraph is about. Fit it. Focus sentence. Introducing a new concept, a new quote. Misinformation is easily and quickly spread, and most people are stuck in their own circles on the internet, making it nearly impossible for them to be able to gain the full story in most cases. Okay, we're just redefining now, refocusing what this paragraph is really about, and we're tying it to an argument. And let's look at this highlighted section. This often leads to people believing that their opinions and ideas are the default way of thinking. Now, default is a key term that David Foster Wallace uses a lot. And as Wallace puts it, comma, open quote, thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. Notice the brackets with the ellipses in it. The automatic unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's problems. A little bit of a long quote, but that's okay. It fits within the flow of the sentence. It is introduced in that first sentence. Misinformation is easily and quickly spread. Then we have this new sentence. This often leads people to believe that their own opinions and ideas are the default way of saying. It's using a quote, or a key term rather, to get us into the quote, and it introduces the quote by saying, Wallace puts it, comma, then now this sentence flows. And if you notice how this quote works, notice that it's not the beginning of the actual sentence itself. It's somewhere in the middle. That's why it's not capitalized. It fits the flow of the sentence. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's up with this weird ellipses in the brackets? Now, I'm going to tell you this, and some of you may know. When you put anything in brackets, not parentheses, but brackets inside of your quote, inside of those quotation marks, if you can see here, here's quotation marks, and here's quotation marks. If you put anything in a bracket inside the quotation marks, it means that you, as the author of this paper, are adding something. Now, sometimes you might want to use those brackets to change like the pronouns or the tense of a sentence. You might want to, instead of having it be in past tense because that's the way that David Foster Wallace wrote it, you might want to put it in present tense because your paper is in present tense. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you need to clarify who's talking. So you might want to put he or I, but that's not part of the quote. You might want to put that in a bracket. Now this ellipses, that's the dots, the 3 dots. That illustrates that you as the author of this paper have included a gap. If you find this quote in the David Foster Wallace piece, you will see that this is a much longer quote. And what the author of this paper did is they needed the quote to say what they needed it to say. They needed to integrate it into the flow of their own paper. And they didn't need a bunch of BS. They didn't need a bunch of information that didn't fit with their argument. They needed to get rid of some of the fat. They needed to trim the fat. So that little bracket with the ellipses says, I took pieces of this quote out, but I'm letting you know as the reader that I took some stuff out. It doesn't change the meaning of the quote, but all it really does is that it slims it down, it trims the fat, it makes it fit within the flow of their own sentence, and makes sure that it fits, it's integrated. Now, the one thing that I will say that they did wrong here is that they put a period at the end of the quote. You see where I'm at right here? After the world's problems, there should be no period there. It should just be the world's problems, quotation mark, open parentheses, the page that you found the quote on, close parentheses, period. That's how it works. You want to integrate your quote and make it flow with your paper. You don't want to add anything weird. You don't want to put things out of context, but you want it to flow. And this is an example of how this quote is tailored to the things that this author wants to say. What this author is doing is starting the quote exactly where they want to start it. They're not starting it at the beginning of the sentence with a bunch of BS and the fat that they need to trim out anyway. They're starting it where they need to start it to fit it into the flow of their own thought, their own sentence. And then there's some gaps in the middle that they let us as the reader know using the brackets. And then they keep going and then they stop. The only thing wrong here is that that period at the end of problems needs to go away. And the period needs to be on the outside of the parentheses. And again, that's an MLA thing, which we'll really get into, but please keep that in mind. Please keep in mind that this author introduced their quote and then integrated it. And then what they did was that they unpacked it. They interpreted it. Without realizing, we often forget that we are not the center of the universe, that there are bigger problems in life than us. That's really unpacking, not repeating, but unpacking what that quote is really talking about and trying to pivot it or turn it into their own argument. We accidentally blind ourselves from the reality of the world because we feel that issues are only important if they directly impact us. That's, again, we're building an argument. We're using the quote that we introduced and integrated into the flow of our own sentence. And now we're interpreting it as a way of explaining what the quote is saying in relation to the argument that the author is making. And I want everyone to pay attention to that. When it comes to quoting, you want to use exact language. You want to copy word for word what the quote is saying. You don't want to change anything up. The quotation marks mean that you're using word for word exactly from the text. You want to make sure that you introduce that text. Who's saying it? What is the context surrounding it? You want to integrate it into the flow of your own sentence, and then you want to interpret it. You don't want to summarize it. You don't want to repeat it in your own words. You want to use it by interpreting it. What does it say? And what does it say about the argument that you are making? And how does that tie into the next quote, which you will introduce, integrate, and tie into the larger argument? Remember, the 3 I's mean introduce, integrate, and interpret. And all 3 of those things work for each quote that you use in each body paragraph. Every body paragraph needs a quote from text number 1 and a quote from text number 2. Remember the fit-it method, F-I-T-I-T, focal sentence, which we saw in the example. Introduce and integrate the quote, and you interpret it. You tie, F-I-T, tie that first quote into the next quote, which you introduce and integrate, and then tie everything together and transition into the next paragraph. Everything that we do in this class is built on the thing before it. So remember, close reading helps you understand the text, helps you identify key terms, key concepts, key ideas, the vocabulary there. What is it that the authors are saying? Then you want to use your ability to connect these ideas. Maybe they don't use the same words, but the ideas are the same. You want to make sure that you connect those. A quote from first text, a quote from the second text. Every single body paragraph needs that. And when you connect those 2 things together, you want to make sure that your body paragraphs follow the fit-it method. Focal sentence, introduce, integrate, and interpret. Tie that first quote into the next one that you introduce and interpret. or introduce, integrate, and interpret, and then you tie all that stuff together and move into the next paragraph. And those I's in the fit it method are the 3 I's from quotations. It's almost like this is the easiest thing on earth. It's almost like there's a huge formula, and writing a paper is just like basically following a formula. And that's what it is. I want you all to understand that writing is formulaic. All right. Do the reading of your primary texts. Do the reading of these handbooks. Watch these videos and just follow the fit it method and use the 3 C's when you want to make connections, and then use the 3 I's when you want to bring your quotes in. If you do these things, you will succeed. Sometimes we might not be great at it, but that's what practice is. Practice makes perfect. And that's what this class is about, giving you the tools and the formulas so that you can practice them and get good at it. All right. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Please let me know. You can always email me via IU email. If you have questions about this video, any other video, or the assignments that are coming up, you know how to get a hold of me. And yeah, all right, smart people, go do what it is that you do.